welcome to another episode of On the Waterfront, sponsored by Waterfront Logistics. I'm Weston, LaBar, and here with me today is a close personal friend. We've had a lot of different opportunities to try to make this industry better. We've sort of switched positions here over the last 5 or 6 years, but I've got Robert Loya, CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association. You've just completed close to 6 months now in this role, right? So time flies when you're having fun and trying to do the omens work of dragging an industry uphill, kicking and screaming sometimes. But Robert, let's start off. I mean, I think the organization's really lucky to have you. I know I leaned on you a lot when I was in that role. You've been a voice of the industry, both private sector and now as the voice of the industry. So just first of all, tell us, for those who don't know you, who you are, and then give a little bit about HTA because,
Sure.
it's near and dear to my heart, but I look at the HTA as motor carrier or drayage operators insurance policy to be able to stay in business. We're all stronger together. So Robert, who are you? And tell us about what you do.
So Weston, thank you. It's kind of funny that we're in the reverse roles here, but I think, I was very fortunate enough, although you guys leaned on me, I learned a lot from you and your predecessor, which is my also predecessor, Matt. So I was very fortunate enough to see you guys in a different perspective, and that allows me to do what I'm doing, right? And so Robert has been an operator for 30 years. I'm a trucker who turned to be an advocacy CEO. Never thought I was going to do this, but I've always enjoyed the advocacy part of the industry, helping those who didn't have the opportunities that I had. Right, I was very fortunate to work for some very big organizations who gave me opportunity to attend, like the ATA, the CTA, and all these other associations. So I got to learn a lot about how the industry, the back office, kind of works. And so, as you know, it helped me understand the overall ecosystem of the supply chain and all the actors and stakeholders and what their constraints are. I think it's important to understand and know what each stakeholder and their constraints are, so that way you can advocate better for the motor carriers. I'm a motor carrier at heart. I say that all the time, and I truly mean it. I absolutely advocate the heck out of it. I think I've been called a fierce advocator for the motor carriers. I said, no doubt. I'm one that always been pro trucker. I want to make sure that we have a voice in the table. We've been very fortunate to have, like yourself and Matt prior to me, who was the voice for us, right? You guys did an amazing job articulating all the issues for us, learning from the motor carriers, and now I'm learning from those who preceded me, which is you guys, how to advocate. I think it's different being a motor carrier and sharing your issues and versus articulating them, building the diplomatic relationships that you need to build. But at the same time, as you know, Weston, it's hard. Sometimes you got to push back. And the same folks that you're trying to build relationships with, because they're the other stakeholders in the supply chain, we see different. We have different goals and objectives. So that's something that I learned from you guys. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it. It's like you said, 6 months, and it's been a whirlwind for sure. So I've been very fortunate and grateful that now I was trusted by my fellow peers to kind of help lead the association. So,
Well, you've done a great job of transitioning from the forceful operator that you've always been to really understanding. I mean, it's a difficult position. There's a lot that goes into it. We're part of a ecosystem that's codependent, but we all are trying to optimize our own businesses, and this creates friction throughout the supply chain. And so, understanding what's important to other stakeholders, like a steamship line is not my competitor, right? A marine terminal is not my competitor, but all of us need to be successful and need to help each other be successful ultimately for the system to work.
that's right.
And so the understanding of, for years, and you see this, you saw this as a member, and now you see it as the CEO, people will come and say, I need you to do this. And it's your job to say, well, that's not going to work, and here's why, but this is what we can do. And that's a little bit what you're talking about, of that nuanced of, I think there's more than one way to skin the cat. I think this is the better way to go about it. You have to have coalition partners. I always used to joke the drayman was the redheaded stepchild of the industry, and that's why I was perfectly suited at the time to do the role. But you have to have your customers, other industry alliances. So whether it was a baseball stadium in Oakland where you're partnering with the PMSA, or it was OSRA where you're partnering with the National Retail Federation and AgTC and all these different importers and exporters, you need to understand who's got the same issues you do.
That's right.
But with that, you rarely get 100% of what you ask for. You usually get something you can live with, and then you always have some sort of cleanup you have to do. So, OSRA is probably top of mind for a lot of people. We're now 5 years into the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, first real major legislation in 30 plus years on ocean shipping, and it came out of a lot of events created by the alliances that started in the 20 teens. And then you saw the Hanjin bankruptcy, the implementation of appointments, so many different things that created a perfect storm for inefficiency. Talk a little bit, because I was in this role when we started that conversation, and when we sort of got it to the doorstep. Matt took over on the doorstep and walked it through the door. You're now basically doing the postmortem and saying, okay, what did we miss and how can we fix it? Talk a little bit about the unintended consequences of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act and what needs to be fixed to get back to the intent of it, because there's a lot of things going on. And I know you've been very vocal about this recently. It's probably one of the top issues for members of the Harbor Trucking Association, but the intent of OSRA, uh, adjacent to how people are circumventing the intent of OSRA, but complying with the letter of the law.
Right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We're 5 years into it, and as I think you and I had a discussion before, people figure out what they can push the envelope on, and people get, whether they get smarter, they figure out a different loophole within the OSRA Act. Obviously, as you know, the FMC, we recently lost a decision on the actual OSRA preamble, and there was some conflict language, and then the World Shipping Council was able to get that. Although to this date, we've nationally have been checking with all the other trucking associations across the country, and not one trucker has been billed directly, even though the World Shipping Council and the ocean carriers have the ability to do that, because they vacated that portion of the bill. So you can actually start getting the bills, although no motor carrier has. And I think the biggest reason why, in my opinion, is that people have figured out, the ocean carriers have figured out, it's better to deal with the commercial contract than it is to deal with maybe perhaps a UIA or something that's out there that they have to follow these rigid guidelines. At least that's in the perspective of what we're seeing. There's been a uptick over the last probably 8 to 9 months in ocean carriers using commercial terms to try to manipulate or change how. For example, I'm just going to share this. This is something that's more near and dear to our hearts, because it's really impacting a lot of motor carriers in the LA Long Beach Gateway, and the BCOs are unaware. And this is something that we're trying to bring to light. The ocean carriers are using commercial terms. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't letting the BCO know, but they're using calendar day versus a working day, for example, when it comes to free time. And so most of the time, probably 100% of the time, they're different than what the ocean or the marine terminal is posting as a last free day. They're using a port tariff or a terminal tariff versus a commercial terms, and the commercial terms just says calendar day. So we've had several instances with major ocean carriers that have using that language, and when we're disputing that invoice, because the BCO brings it to our attention, to the motor carrier's attention, and said, "Hey, why are we getting a demurrage bill?" Well, we picked it up within the last free day. Here's the screenshot. Here's my appointment. Terminal website said this is the last free day. They're saying, well, no, the commercial terms between myself, the ocean carrier, and the BCO are X. Well, that is not what the intent of OSHA was. That is not to create confusion when you have two different last free days. One that's been historically for decades been the way you calculate free time. Now they're redefining how to do that, right? And so they're using that loophole instead of billing the trucker directly, which then you have to now start following the terminal tariffs, port tariffs. They're saying commercially, I can hide behind my commercial contract. Maybe not slip it into that contract. When I mean slip it in, the customer may not even know that they just signed an agreement stating that they're being billed by calendar day. So that is one of the things that we are seeing. that has kind of been a big hurdle for us. We're pushing back as hard as we can. We are now, as which you started, a coalition. I think at the time was a Demersion Detention Coalition, but now it's called Coalition of.
Yeah, Fairport, the Coalition for Fair Port Practices is
That's
what
right.
it ultimately
Is now.
was named, and that happened like I think right as I was transitioning
Right.
it to Matt. But you talk about something like getting 70 plus different groups to sit around and say we all have one issue,
Right.
and then stick together by and large to get it over the hump. That's a huge testament. I think what helps is, well, what would be interesting to know actually is that coalition still meets, still has these discussions. I think that the power moving forward is going to be incumbent on that coalition marching up the hill together, because otherwise it's going to become very fragmented. And just a quick aside, like I know a lot of people think of the HTA and they've been to meetings. They think about the networking. They think about Dre Tech, which is coming up, by the way.
Right.
I'll let you give a plug for that. But really, it's the power of the organization. And if you're a motor carrier and you're not a member, or if you work with motor carriers and you're not a sponsor, you're really missing out, because the organization, to me, the power is they advocate, innovate, and educate, and that's so important. You're advocating for better rules for the draymen to play by, and so we have fair rules within the sandbox for everybody in the ecosystem. Look at different ways to innovate, like appointment systems, which we'll hop into after we finish up the OSRA conversation, to try to make things better and use systems and technology. And there's been good examples of that, and there's been bad examples of that, but nonetheless, you don't have progress without trying to innovate. And then educating motor carriers. I mean, and this is where I think you're gonna do leaps and bounds better than the folks that preceded you, because you come from the industry. But teaching them how to fight a demurrage bill, teaching them what OSRA actually says, or what the UIIA says, and what their rights are as a motor carrier. These are things that never existed
Right.
prior to the HTA in its current format. And so, I think it's so important, because as we go through this, it's not just about what's broken, but hey, as we fix it, you want to be at the table if you're a motor carrier talking to Robert, because if you say, hey, Weston, this is what the industry says, and I go, well, hold on, here's one caveat, here's how it would impact my business. We can't solve everything for everybody, but if we're at the table and we're sharing how it impacts us, there's sometimes where we're not all seeing things the same way, but that information sharing is how we get to the best policy making and give you the tools you need to go and be confident in how you fix the problems on our behalf. So first of all, thank you. And as I said, I can't help myself but to promote the HTA. To me, it's the most important organization for anybody that's a motor carrier on the West Coast operating in the ports. But what is some of the specific cleanup, long-winded way, what is some of the specific cleanup for OSHA? Because you talked about the commercial terms, and I can tell you that we've had multiple instances where specific ocean carriers have we've had an appointment in free time. It's at 1 a.m. We show up at 1 a.m. We're told we have to go pay demurrage before we can get access to a
Right.
container. But on the websites and everything else, it says that I'm within last free day.
That's
So that's one of the issues. Talk about some of the conversations that you can share, and some of the concepts that everybody knows needs to be updated.
Right. And I well, thank you first and foremost, because I think you guys did an amazing job with all the coalition. And you're right about education. It's not just educating our motor carrier members, because we have so many new entrants into the market. It's a constant education piece, right? And as you stated, since I've come from the industry, I kind of understand it very well. And as I stated when you first opened up, I was very fortunate to be part of the UIA IAC committee. I was at the FMC innovation teams. Those were the first innovation teams that were created. So I've been in part of, as you have as well, been part of many operational port efficiency groups and all that. So I got to see the nuts and bolts of how this stuff all developed. And so I'm able to share that, right? My whole intent, I love educating. And the more empowered we provide our members are, I think the better from a voice perspective and from equality. That's all we're really looking for, is equity. We're looking for a fair level playing field. We're not looking to one up anybody. We just want to make sure we do our part, and we're not being bullied or treated in a way that essentially, takes advantage of the situation, which is what we're seeing today, right? The ports, when I spoke to the ports about this specific example that you referenced, when it's picking up after midnight, although everything says last 3 days perfectly fine, except the commercial terms, they were a little surprised as well. And so when I've had conversations with those specific steamship lines, and currently to date, I've had 3 steamship lines that are doing that. Not to say that the other ones aren't doing it. It's just lack of understanding. Maybe some beneficial cargo owners are getting invoices that they're unaware why. And so I am meeting with NRF, and we are meeting with their council. I am going to do a presentation on those specific examples that we've seen. And so making them more of aware, right? It's all about that education that you talked about. So that's one thing that we need to address. On the export side, I'm sure you've heard this plenty of times, is the lack of transparency between, receiving days, early receiving days, first receiving day, and last receiving day, and how that window is a moving target. And it's so difficult to plan when you're an inland, grower in Minnesota trying to catch a train to make a window on the West Coast. It's extremely difficult. These are not airplanes. These are ships traveling 21 knots. You're trying to tell me they don't know when they're going to berth? Absolutely, they know
They
when they're
do.
going to berth, right? If an airport can change gates and give you updates instantaneously, how can a ocean carrier not provide that same kind of transparency, right? And so it really frustrates the ATC, which is another membership and coalition that we dearly support. Peter Friedman and his group, right? And thanks to you and Matt, you guys built great relationships with them, and we do everything in kind where we're supporting their members, they're supporting us. But that's another big issue that we deal with, right? The cutoffs, and then all the fallout from COVID, as you're well aware, on the detention side, right? When you pick up containers and that window moves, and you're like, holy smokes, now I'm outside of the free time, even though I picked it up in good faith within the free window when it was posted, right? So, defining that, I don't know if it means like creating some sort of legislation or reform part of the OSHRA that addresses that, right? And I think that's another big issue that has been hurting the industry significantly. And to tell us that systems don't talk to each other when you're a multi-billion-dollar companies that are controlled, foreign owned, it's hard for me to even think about. Are you being serious? Are you telling me you're a multi-billion-dollar company and your system cannot communicate to the ocean marine terminals to tell them when that vessel is coming in? I get it if you're outside your berth window, and maybe if I'm talking over some of your member or your listeners' heads, but everybody has a contractual window when they're supposed to arrive. If they're outside of that window, the terminal doesn't have an obligation to receive you. But if they can, they will, right? And so when they want to fit you in, they will. So they know when that thing's going to arrive. And so posting that information on a timely basis to give the inland people, our growers, our nation's growers, agricultural growers, enough time to catch a train and make the window, it just doesn't seem like it's that complicated. Maybe I'm
It's
simplifying it, Weston. I don't know.
No, but you look at it, and especially with this current administration in Washington, D.C., they're very focused on America first, right? The whole Make America Great Again platform is about how do we essentially repatriate industries back into America that have been gone as part of globalization, which America started in the early 1990s, right, post Soviet Union collapse. So, and for those of you who haven't seen it, I did a podcast recently with a professor from UVM, and that's all we talked about is sort of policy wise how we got to here we are today. A little bit different, but if you're a nerd like me, you might be interested in it. But there's this window here where a couple of these things bubble up, right? Which is exporters are being disproportionately impacted by the last receiving day, early receiving day, moving of things. You're supposed to have a fixed amount of time. You don't have a fixed amount of time. But at the end of the day, if you don't kick the field goal through the moving goalpost,
Right.
you get penalized for it, right? And that's we've seen enough college football kickers just miss field goals where the goalposts don't move, right? So
That's
so
right.
let's not make it more difficult. Robert was a college football player, so I like to make these analogies with him. Um, but so like I think that's a big part of it is how do we create something that's predictable, fair, and doesn't create additional cost to the American exporter.
That's right.
And then the whole connotation of there's not systems, there's no visibility. So the ports and the federal government and the state governments have invested millions of dollars in systems only to have private sector participants decide not to participate in it. So the tools are there. Years ago, I spoke on a panel, and David Libatique from the Port of LA challenged me to use a few buzzwords, and I think it's funny because I got up and I just said APIs, big data, artificial intelligence. And right off the bat, I was able to win that bet. But these are things that are here today. Like
Right.
back in 2018, we were talking about the need for them. They're here today. So there's no excuse from a systems perspective. It's really about leveraging the tools that most other industries already leverage. Understand people have their own commercial enterprises that they need to look out for. I mean, we're just trying to move freight for our customers and make enough money doing it to where we can generate economic activity and pay
Right.
people wages. Like, let's just be honest. That's what the industry
Yeah,
tries to
no one's
do.
doing it for practice, right? No.
Yeah, and I don't show up just because I really like watching trucks leave all day long, right? Like I do it because we're trying to do something that's impactful. I think that we're probably one of the most underappreciated industries, if not the most underappreciated industry in the entire country, because there's not a person that doesn't depend on what we do every single day. And you know what? The only time anybody ever showed us appreciation is when their packages didn't show up from Amazon or
Right.
whomever else
During COVID.
24 hours after they ordered it on COVID because the supply chain was broken and it needed to be fixed. So we do such a good job despite all of this, but we're the ones left figuring out all of the fallout of fees and stupid rules and not like the lack of visibility because of lack of participation. And to me, it's a perfect segue into the evolution of how the appointment system has continued to do the same thing. Because you go back 10 years, not every terminal had an appointment system. The terminals here in Southern California through Wickham TOA created standard practices that they were all going to observe because every appointment system had different rules. Well, that sort of worked until it stopped working because they decided that wasn't suiting their needs anymore. And again, I'm not going to bash anybody for doing what's in the best interest of their company because they still need to pay people and generate economic activity. But if it's outside the spirit of things we've all agreed to try to make a set of rules that everybody can live by, understand, and play by, then there's an issue. And I think that the appointment systems have continue to be linked to a lot of the policy issues, and they don't always evolve with the policy, and vice versa. I mean, you've spent a lot of time talking about
Yeah,
this.
and you kind of segue from like a perfect opportunity from like still with the OSHA issue, which is the transparency and the APIs and data, which then also links to appointment systems. So part of the OSHA reform, or basically one of the things that OSHA has hindered us in, and what even I think Carl Bensel even tried that MTDDI project, which is
Yeah.
still relevant, right? I mean, we're talking about
Marine
transparency.
Terminal Data Initiative. For those who aren't aware,
100%.
MTDI was this Marine Terminal Data Initiative, and it was all about trying to set a baseline of standards, not forcing people to do anything or
Right.
share any. It was about this is how we should look at data, no differently than we do. How do you plug in your electric car? How do you like? There's a reason everybody has micro USBs as charging devices these days. It's because you need standards, so there's not just higgledy piggledy all over.
Right. And so
Sorry, go
that
ahead.
leads to, although Carl Bensel is no longer doing that project, but it's still relevant and it's still impacting us today. So it's a perfect segue from how does that still need to be worked on, because with the lack of transparency, the lack of third-party access, that essentially hinders our ability for demergent detention and appointment system. So those are two other items that are impacting actually all gateways across the country. As you know, we deal a lot with the New York, New Jersey, and the bi-state and their issues. We cover all the West Coast, and we see the same problems at all the major gateways, with the lack of transparency, the lack of third-party access of data, appointment systems hindering our ability. Though when they were initially put into place, as you well know, Weston, they were to help the industry get more predictable turn time, better man planning, kind of, I guess in a way, meter traffic into the port so you can have a predictable planning process. Although, it's really been looked at, and more than anything else, impacting availability, impacting, well, it's been cost beneficial for the marine terminals, but very impactful for the commercial side or the trucking side. And so what has happened is that, as you know, appointment availability has been one of the biggest problems that we've all seen across the country. A consumption of free time, which is also an at least not an OSHA, but an AB 2406, which you and I and a few others helped rewrite in California, that talked about consumption of free time. And so the appointment system has been very beneficial for the marine terminals in LA Long Beach. We've never had as good a turn times as we've ever in the history of this gateway. And so when people ask me like, well, then the appointment systems work, I said, but who do they work for? They don't work for the industry, for the rest of the industry, only one piece of that pie. And you talked about it, right? And believe me, when I was at the FMC during those innovation times and those discussions we're having about implementing appointments, I said, look, I am all for helping the industry and making sure it's the right thing to do for the gateway to densify, to get more cargo through, but it can't be weaponized. And that's what exactly it's being used for now, right? You got winners and losers. You got this last free day of past midnight. You can't get appointment systems. You're having to defend yourself as a motor carrier or BCO or broker who's securing appointments for their customers and truckers, and you're not even allowed to use a third-party system. They want you to use a manning person to screenshot to show that there's no appointments. I mean, because they're minimizing the rows that are closed. So I mentioned this during TPM, is the terminals are no longer posting closed rows. And so for those that deal with the random access model, you understand that what that term means is that they would tell you, okay, the container is available, but this row is closed. We're not servicing that row.
In a closed area.
That's right.
We won't service you.
So,
Yep.
but it's essentially not available. Although the free time clock is ticking, and under the commercial terms, they don't care. They don't care if the terminal's open or not. As long as it shows available discharge, it's clicking. That clock is ticking. So these are all these onerous processes that we are now having to deal with and trying to constantly to defend our customer from paying to merge. Not because it's we don't want to pick up the cargo. It's that we don't have the opportunity to pick up the cargo. Our actual import dwell here in LA Long Beach is less. It's like 2.7 days or 2.8 days. It's like, so if you think about that, that's the first day. It's very rare that you get an appointment, like absolutely rare, unless you're an IPI cargo, which basically leaves the gate for the rail. It's got to make its cuts. That's who gets primarily those first appointments. So you're really, the first opportunity is like the second day / third day. Well, if we're leaving 2.8 days, that's 1.8 days that cargo is sitting there when we actually have an opportunity to go get it. And we're doing what we're supposed to do. And that's in this environment currently that we're dealing with, where you're being restricted about how many times you can go pick up a container. Random access model was a time where the marine terminals had to deploy labor in all the rows that were open, not knowing if you're going to show up or not, right? Now they're controlling the labor costs, minimizing the number of appointments to manufacture a turn time. So when people ask me like, well, the appointment systems are helping with turn times, I'm like, sure. If you think about it this way, if I turn a faucet very slow, open it very slow, you're going to have a drip. And you can control that drip. But if you turn it on really fast, it's going to overflow and you're going to have congestion. I said, so they're doing a heck of a job controlling that drip. And I said, what that means is less appointments per day, per hour, per shift. And I said, so I gave a very simple example, and I'm sure you could appreciate this. If you have 4,000 imports on the ground, are the terminals offering 4,000 appointments on a given day? Absolutely not. It's a math problem.
Yeah.
So they're consuming your free time. But guess what the terminals or the ocean carriers are making us do? Prove that there's no appointments. I said, I don't even need to do that. I just give you a math problem. There's no way they're offering 4,000 appointments.
You take it one step further, and first of all, it's one thing to say this is the information that we require to extend free time. It's
Right.
another thing to tell me how I must gather that information. That is a gross overstep of
100%.
where their responsibilities line up. But yeah, I mean, we've seen it with ocean carriers who, maybe you can only get appointments all at 3 a.m. and all of a sudden you got 50 that you have to do. Now, some terminals will work with you on that and some
Right.
won't, but maybe that's the first time during free time I could get an available appointment was, the middle of the night on the last free day. And that's a big issue for truckers because we have to manage our fleets. We have to manage our capacity.
That's
We
right.
have to manage the customer's warehouse. Like, that's the thing I think people forget about a trucker is a terminal's managing their facility. A warehouse is managing their facility. A trucker is managing the ability to pick up and drop off at multiple facilities. And that is a very difficult exercise to go through if you're being told you have to pick it up here at this time, but you can only deliver it here at that time.
Right.
And that's a big part of the equation. It's a science project for a trucker. And then to say, there's all these new, I'm going to steal from you, all these new administrative burdens, but now you're telling me that I can't solve it with modern technology through integrations, through using, certain types of AI software potentially that could grab those screenshots. It's a gross injustice compared to what we're trying to accomplish, which is creating fairness. Detention and demurrage was never supposed to be a revenue source. It was supposed to be a penalty for not performing your responsibilities within the allotted time, either picking up or dropping off equipment, essentially within the time, because we don't own it.
That's right.
But we need it to be able to do what our customer wants of us, and our customer needs it to move their freight. And I think this is where the sort of the friction happens. Is you're trying to solve for the issues today, which several years ago was turn times, because you had 160-minute turn times at some terminals. We, as the HTA, even when I was still there back in 2020, we had shifted from turn times to productivity. What are the productivity metrics? Are we doing dual transactions? And I think we've gotten through that a little bit, right? Have we done this? Have we done that? But to your point, like I had an argument with a steamship line, and I had to include the FMC because every location they had was closed, not receiving, and they wanted screenshots that we tried to get an appointment and return. Like, they're not open. They're literally closed. Why am I sending you information that I couldn't get in if they're not even open for a shift at that point in time?
Right.
So I think it comes back to what you're talking about, equity and fairness in the rules. Is it fair to impose that rule? That expectation's unrealistic.
Yeah, and I believe when we talk about reasonableness, this is not reasonable. They're putting us in an impossible situation, and they know it, right? And I think they thrive on that. And I say this because of experience of the emails I'm seeing as I've asked my members, just like you, if you've gotten into a disagreement with the ocean carriers, those members don't know how to defend themselves against ocean carriers. So I always ask them, if you're in a situation that you don't understand how to push back, put me on copy. And if I see that the ocean carrier is being I call bully, because now they're trying to enforce their will on that poor little motor carrier who doesn't understand, I jump in, and believe me, that conversation immediately changes when I come in, because I've helped most of my motor carriers that have put me on copy to get those invoices basically canceled and voided. I said, because I have no problem telling an ocean carrier, fine, if this unreasonable behavior that and onerous administrative burdens you're putting onto us is how you're gonna hold us accountable to it, no problem. We'll issue a charge complaint. Soon as we start throwing FMC charge complaint into the mix, immediately, well, we'll make this one-time consideration to cancel your invoices. I'm like, no, this is the problem, is that unless you have somebody who understands how to push back to make it an equitable plain and fair, because they're totally, and I said to them, just like your empty return issues, and I had a very similar one we did with one of the steamship lines that they were trying to share static information to prove their point that there was appointments. And I said, I don't give a poop about your static information. I said, that was a start of the day. It doesn't take into consideration all the fluctuations throughout the day. It doesn't take into consideration the appointments at each of those facilities you're telling me to go to. It doesn't take into consideration throughout the day. It doesn't take into consideration the inventories at those locations, and doesn't take into consideration the competition to get the appointments from the other customers that are going to those facilities.
And just because there's appointments opened up at 9 a.m. doesn't mean that they're available at 9:01 a.m., right? Because there's people there gather those appointments and hold on to them like gold, because they really are. If he who has the gold makes the rules, I can pick up or drop off a container if I have an appointment. And I think that's part of the issue as well, right? Is that's great, but I don't necessarily know when appointments are released, and if somebody else gets them before I do, that's great. I also may have an inability to service the customer at that point in time because I've already made appointments elsewhere, and it's not like we have just a line of truck drivers and
Sitting
trucks
there
sitting here
waiting.
going,
Right.
okay, is there an appointment available right now? No, we pre-schedule these things typically at least 24 hours in advance. You know, we're constantly planning the week and augmenting 24 or 12 hours in advance based
Right.
off of what we're seeing. It's a game of Tetris to try to make all the blocks fit into the screen neatly. Um, yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how we as an industry deal with a cleanup to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. It's always good to see that the FMC is still paying close attention to this. It wasn't a okay, check the box. We passed some legislation. Now let's move on.
That's
I
right.
think if anything else, you've seen some new blood come into the FMC with now Chair Diabella and having a different lens coming into it fresh, but saying, no, this our work's not done. And then having folks like Rebecca Dye who have been and Dan Maffei who have been, champions of fairness and
Right.
reasonableness there to say, well, this is why we did it that way. And so you've got this nice mixture of new blood with new ideas and the folks that helped get us to where we're at today. And like I said, I think we're at a unique time to, especially for exporters, because we want to make it easier for Americans to build here and export. But to do that, we need to make sure that trucking companies and their service providers to the BCOs don't go out of business trying to service them. And
Right.
I'd like in maybe the last segment here to talk a little bit about how the industry's changed so much since COVID, because they're not all COVID effects,
Right.
but there's the lasting impacts. If you go back 10 years, it was a very predictable, even 5 years ago, right? It was very predictable to say, okay, you're going to have a lull post Chinese New Year because you're going to have a lot of blank sailings. You knew sometime in July or August, you were going to start to see an uptick in freight, and you'd have a peak season, essentially August, September, October, November, right? Until about halfway through, because you had back to school and you had
Right.
holidays and everything else. And it's all over the map. I recently spoke to an importer who said, hey, we think there's another tariff rush coming, right? Because um, of the back and forth between the White House, the Supreme Court, Congress. And they said, we think in July there'll be another one. So we're going to start really ramping up, loading the ship. If it's ready to go, send it, right? Let's
Right.
forget about it. Let's just send it. But that's been, unfortunately, a lot of companies, some of them in business over 100 years, great operators, well respected through really, no fault of their own other than maybe the mix of customers they had and just the way the industry went, found themselves in difficult positions, some having to close their doors or at least shut down divisions. What advice do you give to folks like as you look at this, because we're dealing with so many different pressures, increased cost of doing business through a multitude of things, operating models, administrative burdens, etc. You've got um, you've got the fluctuation in volume. So as I said last year, it was feast or famine. One week you might be trying to figure out how to keep your business afloat because you've got no freight moving. How do I keep my drivers? How do I keep
Make
my
payroll.
workers happy? And then the next week it's I don't have enough assets to service my customer because you don't have that happy flow of volume that traditionally is what made the industry up. You've got the impacts of e-commerce that create different customer demands. You've got venture capital money that's come in the industry that have tanked rates. Without getting into specific rates, I had one person say these remind me of the late 1990s, which tells you where the rates can be for some customers. I mean, so if you're a motor carrier in this day and age, like what do you do? Because I feel like every time there's a sense of exhale, okay, I think we got through this. You see the next mountain, it's like climbing Everest. There's always another peak.
That's right. And just really quick, we at the HTA annually go to Washington D.C. We do kind of like a call in Washington, and we will be visiting the FMC next month, as you mentioned, DeBella, Rebecca Dye, Maffei, and we'll be talking about all these issues that we are dealing with. So that's to be TBD to become, and they're well aware of the issues. We've had pre-calls with them, so just wanted to make sure everybody was aware. aware that HDA, that's the meat, meat and potatoes of what we do, right? And I think you mentioned that early on in our conversation. Now, to fast forward to your points about the unpredictability, I think if you remember, starting 2025, it was all about unpredictability. Just like you couldn't predict when the volumes were. The traditional peak seasons, the ebbs and flows you talked about, are no longer here. And it really kind of started not only with COVID, but then you had that mad rush of trucking companies, and everybody was the opportunist to come into the industry because there was so much freight. Well, that created now what we have been now in year 3 of a freight recession. Overcapacity, right? And so what is that created? So fierce competition and rates, undercutting occurring, right? But remember, before we get into that, we had regulatory pressures that we as a motor carrier industry are dealing with, which has also created this other 2 different type of operating models that we're seeing. And our regulatory folks, great California, the state of California, boy, we are great to implement some regulation with lack of enforcement. So you had
or almost implement regulation that people comply with and then
right.
decide not to.
That's 100%. So you have AB5, right? They people spend so much money to comply. Well, then you had these other folks that did nothing, and there's nothing happening to those folks. So these costs increase significantly for the people that complied versus the ones that didn't. Then you talk about ACF, right? We're full board. They put in a waiver request. Who would have thought? And as Matt likes to say in their bingo card, that Trump was going to make it into office, right? But he did. And so ACF was repealed. So what happened to those same companies that were trying to do the right thing, the ones that Trump is now trying to advocate for? We want, safe, secure, trucking companies, the companies that want to do it the right way. These are the same companies that spent all this money to comply with AB5, to comply with ACF, because we had no other reason to believe it wouldn't go into effect. And then you had all these other companies that did nothing. And so now they're able to undercut your bids by several $100s. And so just as you mentioned, since when you don't have a consistent flow, it's unpredictable volumes. Our inability to be competitive from a rate perspective has really caused so many great companies in this country to go under it on a daily, weekly basis across the country, not just California, for all these reasons. And it's sad. But just to talk about California, I mean, we are battling it. As you know, the diesel price is almost $2 difference in between the California average versus national average. And
sitting here today over $8 a gallon diesel in Southern California. Who knows what it'll be next week? But today over $8 a gallon, right? And it's
how do you operate without trying to recover it? And I don't need to tell you because I know you do a lot of the bidding for your company. So you see all these different pricing models come at you, all in rates. Oh, only emergency fuel. No, I want to do national rates, not California diesel rates. And so they won't even. So when I'm getting questioned, just like when you were in this role, you would always get interviewed and questioned about like, how are the truckers dealing with this? I said they're trying to do the best they can. Are they getting 100% recovery? Absolutely not. And then when you get the vessel bunching, which is what you're talking about, where the ocean carriers have changed their performa on vessels because they're voiding vessel calls because they just don't. They're just like you said, they don't know when they're going to get those orders, and all of a sudden they get a rush of orders. Now they're vessel bunching. The vessels arrive simultaneously. I try to historically have always planned to have an even percentage of cargo throughout the week, so my power can sufficiently move that cargo. But when you double that cargo in 1 week, how in the heck are you going to move that cargo? Now you start getting demurrage detention issues and all this other stuff. So we're dealing with so many issues simultaneously. It's almost like a perfect storm. We talked about a perfect storm previously and with all the different dynamics. But you outlined it perfectly, Weston. I mean, there's so many different factors hitting us at once. It is so difficult to operate it, and unfortunately, there's been casualties as a result.
Yeah, it's like that old arcade game Whack-A-Mole, but instead of having like 9 to hit, you've got 9,000 to hit.
Right, there's no way.
And you got to pick and choose which hills that you want to die on and what battles you wanna try to fix. And it's not easy. I mean, you talked about pricing. It's hard because you can't even come up with a straightforward model on how you do pricing because everybody's got their own fuel table. Everybody's got their own way that they want, like inside the rate, as you said, all inclusive, outside the rate as base rate plus fuel. Some companies want all the accessorials included, which is scary. Other
Yeah.
ones, it's pay as you go. But like it's really hard. You rate. Let me just put it this way: you rate things at a certain margin, and very rarely do you hit that. Right?
Right.
You sometimes you're lucky, but oftentimes you trade less than what you tried to model it at. And this is with sophisticated pricing tools and
That's right.
and company trucks and stuff of that, where you know what the information is, but it's not like the days where you went and talked to an owner operator and said, okay, the customer wants to pay X. Would you do it for Y? Sure, that sounds great. They had a
Think
truck that
people
probably
long
didn't have
for
a
those
payment.
days now, right? Everybody's like, I wish it was that simple. It's no longer that simple, right? And then here we are in an environment, Weston, where we're being forced in a state, and mind you, we all want clean air. We all, I mean, no, not one truck will ever tell you, no, I want to run dirty diesels. Absolutely not. But it takes money to convert, right? And people are always asking me, why aren't people transitioning more? I said, well, because they can't even operate. They can barely make payroll. They don't know when freight's coming. Their diesel's whatever. How can I make profits? Now you're asking me to stack loans. First of all, I don't even have the infrastructure to even do it. Public infrastructure is not built out enough, right? I mean, we're starting at the very infancy stage of that, but people are just baffled and say, why aren't we adopting it quicker? I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Do you see what's going on? So, there's so many regulatory pressures on top of just the economic issues with tariffs, as you mentioned. And that's been a big factor. So the word of I guess the month of the session is unpredictability. We don't know when it's coming. And when it comes, we're trying to throw everything we have at it. Then can't get an appointment for it. So then the customer's paying demurrage and they're upset with us because we didn't secure an appointment, which we're not allowed to use a third party software to prove there was no appointment because now we're violating terms and services agreement. So I can go on, Weston, and I get all hot and
Yeah.
bothered about it. And all this, because I've always shared that with you and Matt, just how just unfair and unreasonable it's been for us.
Well,
We're going to keep advocating.
it's the old well, first of all, it's, I guess, refreshing to see nothing's changed since I've sat in the chair you sit in these days. It's a constant, it's an effort. It's a
Yep.
constant effort from the industry's perspective. It's why we need to get involved in organizations like HTA and allow for you guys to try to make it easier for us to do what we're trying to do, which is move freight and make customers happy. And at the end of the day, companies need to do well to do good. Meaning, you need to make money to invest in people, to invest in facilities, to invest in clean technology. Otherwise, you're looking at ways to move things from one bucket to another to survive, right?
That's
And
right.
so,
Right.
we need to pay a closer attention to, can companies support prevailing wages,
That's tough.
pensions,
It is
clean
tough.
trucks, things of that nature. And it's something we all have to look at. Very last thing, because I know you're a busy man, and I really appreciate you taking all this time. You've got more members to talk to and to serve today, but last plug, Dratech. You've got Dratech coming up. This podcast will air just a few weeks before Dratech. I'm excited. Thanks for having me back. Happy to be on a technology panel. It's always good. I feel like it's an alumni event because Matt will be there, and we'll all get to talk about the fun things we deal with. But nonetheless, talk a little bit about Dratech, because to me that's one of those innovate, right? It's about connecting truckers with technology, with resources, what's going on, helping to educate them on tools that they may not be aware of. Let our listeners and our viewers know a little bit about HTA Dratech. When is it? Where is it? What are some of the flavors of things that you can see? And then any parting words for our listeners before I bid them adieu.
Yeah, no, certainly. Dre Tech is next month, and I'm always terrible with dates, but it's May 15th at the Reef in Long Beach. And thank you for being a moderator. Believe me, you and Matt do an excellent job moderating. So if I can have you do all of the moderation, I'd be just happy, because you guys do a really good job. So you'll obviously be doing an AI panel. It's an opportunity to bring our motor carriers our sponsors, affiliates, and new emerging technology in a space, whether that's trucks, whether that's some sort of software that helps manage our business better. It's really, we try to come out as we go to, whether it be ACT or whatever, we go to all these expos and try to find new companies that I'm like, that is a great idea. I think it benefit my industry, right? So I'm constantly doing webinars to try to make sure that if I feel, being in the position I was in an operations for 30 years, if I see something that I'm like, that is going to be a game changer for my members, we'll talk to them, bring them in. So it's an opportunity like for stuff like that, right? All the clean trucks technology will be there. Chassis providers with all their cool GPS and technology software. So we have every stakeholder attend this meeting. This is our signature event. We host 4 panels. Typically, we have Dr. Noel Hosagaba, the CEO of Port of Long Beach, as our guest keynote speaker. So we're very thankful for him wanting to do that for us. And Port of Long Beach, as LA, are great partners of ours that we
Yeah.
work in kind. Thanks to you and Matt for that relationship. So it's 4 panels. You're doing one. Matt's doing one on regulation. I'm doing one on actual cargo theft, which is a big issue. And then we have one on green technology. So Cal Start will be actually moderating that one. I'll do the cargo theft one, which will have TSA, the LA Cargo Cats Sheriff Department, and we also have the CHP part of that panel. So, and then Birdseye, which is a private company, does security. So it's a great panel to talk about it's a huge issue in our country that has very little attention on it. Thank God for the Corca bill that's being pushed through legislation. So it's a great event. It's a Friday, so that way you kind of start your weekend early, show up at 10 o'clock, and then it's an all-day affair. We have 2 major sponsors, CargoWise, which is a TMS provider. They'll be having sessions as well. We try to make the sessions so they don't coincide with the panel discussion, so that way people can actually go to those sessions and learn about those TMS providers, and Port Pros, the other title sponsors. So we're very grateful for those guys.
Oh, you got the Hatfields and the McCoys to
I
come
do.
together. That's great.
I do. But I've learned from you guys. So, I'm like, you guys figured that out. And I was like, all right. But that's kind of Draytech. And I appreciate that. We're always, we usually have about 450 people show up. And it's really like an 8-hour affair. It's all day long. There's a ride and drive in the morning. CalStart is really pushing that hard. They're a big sponsor of ours. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity to kind of just to take on the torch from what you guys have done and kind of build up on that. And we have a great team. As you well know, two of the top folks, staffers that help put on that thing. And if it wasn't for them,
People can't believe how small the team of the HTA is all the time because I mean the you carry a big stick, right? As they say, and fantastic. I mean, Carla is fantastic at everything she's done. She's basically built all the social networking and the marketing and everything, and
right.
what a resource she is. And then Melissa is a world-class event thrower, figures out how to really give you a first-class experience on a coach ticket, which is like fantastic. And what makes this event so unique to me is you mentioned ACT and you mentioned some of these large events. That's a for everybody event. They're servicing a lot of different industries. HTA, you service the drayman, and this is a event that says how these different technologies service and impact drayage companies, not trucking as a whole, not 3PLs, not drayage. And so again, it's probably one of the more affordable, maybe the best value you're going to find. And it's there for you as an operator to as the audience. You're not part of the crowd. You are the crowd, and I think that's one of the things that really stands out. Robert, I really appreciate you coming on. I promised I'd get you out of here at a reasonable hour so you can continue with your duties. Really appreciate it. You're doing a fantastic job. Again, I what always made me proud, I always called the HTA once I left my kid that went off to college, right? Like, I love him. I love the HTA. I love what it stands for. I'm so proud of, the 7 years I spent there. It's like, you're so proud of your kids when you get to see them go off. You're a little sad when it happens, but what's been so, I think for me, and I talk about this, one of the great accomplishments in my career is that the HTA has become its own thing. For a long time, I think people associated me with the HTA, and I said, no, the HTA is what's special. I just have the opportunity to drive the bus.
That's right.
And so Matt took it into a new level. You're doing the same thing. Everybody's had their own flair, but also it makes it unique if people come back, right? Nobody's like, okay, I did my tour of duty. I'm going to go do my other thing. Everybody keeps coming back because it is a special organization, and I'm just so proud of where Matt took it and where you're taking it because um, it's always good to know when you put your heart and soul in something that it's going to outlive the effort that you put into it, and it's also noted by just the diversity on the board,
Yep.
the amount of members, the diversity across the membership, and every time you think ELDs are going away. Where are we going to get our sponsors? Because there aren't 500 self-serving ELD providers anymore. Something new pops up, and the next thing you know, you've got electric truck OEMs or AI
We have
companies,
a lot of
whatever.
AI
So
software companies nowadays.
yeah. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. Again, for those who aren't members, reach out, go to harbortruckers.org. Um, Learn more about the Harbor Trucking Association. Check out Dre Tech. And if you're not a member and you're interested, just reach out via the website and you can attend a membership meeting for free and figure out why it's the right fit for you and for your company. Robert, with that, I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers and listeners. This has been another episode of On the Waterfront, sponsored by Waterfront Logistics. I'm Weston LaBar, this time with Robert Loya. Thank you for joining us. Keep on trucking. And as always, here at Waterfront Logistics, we move it like we own it. Till next time.